the satisfaction you get from doing something that you once thought was genuinely impossible is huge. So like the idea that I could one day do that was fascinating to me. Running for the sake of running, it made no sense to me. I used to hate running. Like growing up as a teenager, I didn't understand like the concept of it. It seemed pointless to me. Most people are not being honest with themselves about the effort they're putting in. You start realizing that, you know, every time you achieve one thing, that, you know, the next thing becomes even more possible in your mind. So I'm Tommy. I'm a keen runner. I do ultra running as like a focus now, I guess. But yeah, I've been running for sort of just over a decade now, and sort of become my great interest that I do, obviously as a hobby, but try and help as many people with it as possible because it's helped me.
Take me 10 years ago then, all the way back. Where did it start? Why did it start? What was the reasoning?
Yeah, I was always into sport when I was a kid, and played, you know, rugby, hockey, all the classics. Not much into football, to be fair, but yeah, was a keen rugby player, and then I left school, and I guess needed a bit of an energy outlet, so started running. Actually, all through my upbringing, my dad, when we were having a strop as kids, would say, "Go for a run," and so I think subconsciously that was always in my mind. And then eventually, like as a kind of 18, 19-year-old, I started running myself. Did it all the wrong ways. You know, went out every day fast as I could. And it was only until like 5 years ago that I really started to understand how to train properly. But yeah, I kind of got into like triathlon when I left school and sort of dabbled in that when I was at uni. Decided against joining the rugby team at uni and actually sort of focusing more on like endurance sport stuff. It just became a real fascination for me. And it's just very easy to have as part of your life, especially as an adult, I guess. So, yeah, that's the story. And then it's just become more and more obsessed as the years have gone by.
Was there a reason for that initial fascination? Like you say, like endurance sport in uni became kind of a fascination, but what was the reasoning behind that, or was it just kind of something you almost fell into?
I don't know, a bit of both maybe. Like I think just like this fascination with people that just wanted to sort of drive and work hard for no apparent reason. You know, if you're chasing a ball or you're throwing a ball, if there's a purpose to the activity, it makes a lot more sense, right? But if you're just running for the sake of running, it made no sense to me. I used to hate running. Like growing up as a teenager, I didn't understand like the concept of it. It seemed pointless to me. Um, but the sort of grit that's shown from like real endurance athletes, especially those who do like Ironmans, that was fascinating to me. And I just thought it was really cool. I just thought it was really cool to be able to like endure a marathon or an Ironman, or eventually when I was exposed to ultra marathons, I just thought it was the coolest thing.
Was there anyone that in those times you kind of saw initially and thought, man, you're sick, you're the guy here?
Um, all of the sort of top Ironman athletes of the time. There was actually a family friend of ours that was like a really keen cyclist and Ironman athlete himself. And when I was about 18, I was sort of training to do this. It was a bit more of a concept uh, half Ironman. It was like an indoors half Ironman, which I put together to raise some money for charity. And I remember going to him for some advice. But he was just, you know, did it on the side. He was no elite athlete, but he was someone I guess I looked up to in that sense. But yeah, anyone at the top that was just doing it. I I think the Brownlees
Yeah.
were really at their prime when I was sort of starting to really get into endurance stuff. It was very cool that we had two Brits at the top.
It's quite cool as well because I think we probably got into endurance sport at a very similar time, and
Mm.
throughout the last sort of 5 to 10 years, you've really seen kind of that quality of not only content but the way people are sharing their stories kind of grow and grow and grow. And I think actually that's why a lot of people are becoming more invested in it. because they've got like an outlet to see how hard these athletes work and like what goes into being a top elite level athlete, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's also just the fact that you can actually input it into your life. Like I work a full-time job. I am obviously more obsessed with running than some, but I think the fascination for me is also that people maybe find running a little bit later on in life. You know, it's actually very rare that people find running at a young age. You definitely have the kind of whippets that are running at those crazy speeds, who have sort of grown up with it and have been, you know, cross country runners since they were kids. I definitely wasn't that, and I think most people who are into running as an adult weren't that. You know, they're people that sort of found it serendipitously and then started realizing, oh shit, this is really like good for me, and I actually am starting to enjoy something I thought I would hate. Um, I often joke that you know, it took me a while to admit that I was a runner, but I think that is kind of how people feel. You know, they have this stereotype of what a runner is. They don't necessarily want to be that, but then eventually they find that they actually enjoy it. And then maybe sort of later down the line, they're like, "Oh, I'm going to do a race," and then they do a race. They like the racing aspect of things, and so I think, yeah, there's something to do. There's something beautiful about the fact that all you need is like a pair of trainers, shorts, and a t-shirt in theory, and you're kind of on your way, right?
And it is a lot. Like if you are training for a big race, like it is a lot, and no one's ever going to hide that. Like you're going to have to put a lot of hours in and a lot of training in. But if you're playing rugby, cricket, footy, like a traditional sport, you're training on a Tuesday and a Thursday, maybe you're playing on a Saturday, and there's no kind of wiggle room in that, is there? That like that is when you do it. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and that's the case every week. Whereas I think sometimes what people don't realize about sort of running or any sport really that is you versus you is you can schedule that, you can work it. It is malleable, and like you're testament to that. Like you say, you're working a job, you've got a home life, a family life as well. Do you ever find it difficult to balance, or how do you do that?
Yeah, it's a big topic always on my mind, you know, especially when you're training for really big challenges. You know, it's all very well doing like a quick 20-minute run if you're not doing anything sort of really long distance. But at the moment, I'm trying to put in, you know, up to sort of 100K of distance in, and then gym work as well, and getting enough time on the Stepmaster, my favorite enemy. You know, all that sort of stuff takes heaps of time, and you're talking about like north of 12, 15 hours of training per week. So I think, you know, I've got a lot of respect for people who have kids. I don't have kids or anything like that. I'm still very kind of able to do a lot of training, but it still requires a lot of dedication. For me, it is getting up pretty early in the morning to get at least some of my day's training in. I have a gym near work, which is helpful. So my gym membership is one that's close to work, which means that when I'm in work, which is 4 or 5 days a week, I am going to the gym after work for the most part. But it all requires like dedication, discipline, you know, all those classic tropes. You know, discipline is better than motivation. It is very true. You have to be motivated to kind of achieve what you want to achieve. Um, for me, like I really start showing up when I get quite intimidated by things. So I've realized that I'm at like 4 or 5 weeks out from a really big race, and it's my first big race since last summer, where, you know, unfortunately I got injured. So it's been a big journey since then. And I'm like, oh shit, I knew I really, you know, I've got the big bulk of training ahead of me now. I need to, you know, up the mileage, up the intensity. And so it starts to get a little bit more serious, and skipping runs becomes less of a possibility. Like running is less negotiable now. Um, how do I balance it? I guess like sometimes there's no such thing as balance. It really, like, it's seasonal. I definitely train seasonally. Like if I've done a race recently, I will have a couple of months of much lower volume and lower intensity, and like it's a case of sort of dialing it back. But when I'm in like peak, right, it's, you know, 8 weeks prior to a big ultra race or something. Like it does become quite a big part of my life. And I have to say no to certain things, or I have to try and be a bit more balanced about, what I'm doing. But that is a good thing, in some ways. Ultimately, I'd rather run more than do, um, you know, a lot of the things that other people are doing more, a lot of the time.
We kind of spoke about your way into this kind of ultra endurance space, but how have you found kind of your niche when it comes to like ultra running? Because that seems to be the thing that you've obviously fallen most in love with. Where did that love affair start?
Yeah, that absolutely is my niche. I think like sometimes I feel like I fall victim to the fact that I live in London, that people don't necessarily realize that I'm not a massive like road marathon runner. I've done road marathons, of course, but I'm definitely not the fastest road marathon runner out there. I think when you really look into it, you realize that marathon training is very clinical. You can hit your paces, especially like city marathons, you can hit your paces pretty clinically. And so your training is similar to that in the sense that you're trying to hit certain paces, and hold a certain pace for, hold a certain threshold pace for a certain period of time and all that sort of stuff. Um, I'm less interested in the sort of more clinical training, if that makes sense. So one thing that really attracts me to ultra running is, for the most part, it's going to be on the trails. Um, I love the outdoors. I love the mountains, and really like the idea of like going 100K or whatever it is across the mountains is far more interesting to me, than just sort of running a fast race on the roads. That's not that I'm not interested in that, or I won't one day try and get another, marathon PB. Um, but I love the mountains. I love the outdoors. I love adventure, and being out in the mountains overnight for like a 20-hour race or however long it might take me is far more sort of fascinating to me than like a 3-hour road run. And it's the unpredictability of it as well. Like you can have a really bad race, or and that can go completely south because you've eaten something weird, like mid race, or you can have a great race, you don't really know why. And there's a lot more admin, there's a lot more things to think about. It's more of a kind of logistical operation than it is necessarily, hitting certain paces. And I think there's also an element of having to be more in tune with how you feel, to a certain extent, because you have so much time ahead of you. You have to be very strict about really tuning into how you feel, to managing your effort, um, also being, humble enough to. I think anyone who moves up to the sort of ultra distances won't realize that you have to, at least early on in the race, really understand that hiking uphill, is advisable, rather than trying to, smash the uphills at the start. Um, and I think with the distance, with the kind of, um, with the scale of the challenge, there's more. In some ways, there's more to learn, um, because so much can go wrong, and it's such a big, intimidating, humbling challenge. And I think, in my experience anyway, having done both marathons and, longer distance events, the satisfaction you get from doing something that you once thought was genuinely impossible, is huge. So like that initial interest for me was looking at those individuals who were doing these, long races, and out there for, 24 hours plus, and thinking these guys, that's insane. I didn't realize that was even like a thing. And it's such a niche sort of thing to be interested in. But the idea that I could one day do that, was fascinating to me. Whereas I think when I was younger, I think it was always a marathon distance for me anyway was always felt within reach. So I think for anyone who's looking to do something, like challenging, if at one point in your life it didn't seem within reach, then you should go for that. And for me, that was like the sort of really longer distance stuff. And it's interesting when you reach a certain distance, whether it's like a 50K, or then you one day do a 50 mile, and then one day you do 100K, you start realizing that, every time you achieve one thing, that, the next thing becomes even more possible in your mind. And so, yeah, I think like you just start realizing that you can actually do these things, and that's a cool thing to me. To constantly be pushing myself. to do that next big thing, you know.
Where does that stop?
Good question. Yeah. I guess that's probably what my girlfriend was asking me. You know, every time I do one of these ridiculous races, it's like, where does it stop? Well, I think it's a genuine problem in the ultra running
Yeah.
space. You know, you create a. I think it's well known that if you create like a 250-mile race, they will come and it will sell out quickly at this point. Um, so I don't know, where does it stop? I think there is an element of like I want it as part of my life. I really do want to be a runner for as long a period in my life as possible. So in my head, I guess it kind of right now it stops at the 100-mile mark, and then I don't necessarily need to take it further than that in my mind. But I'm sure if I get that, my plan is to do that next year, and if I manage to achieve that, I'm sure I'll want to do more, or I'll find an event that I'm interested in. But also when you get to like the really long distances, um, every event is different. So I think it's more interesting in the sense that like I might want to do like um, a very famous event like UTMB or something, but then you can find like a really interesting local 100 miler that might be fascinating for you to do, or there might be a certain trail or a certain route that you've got in your head that you want to do. Um, so I think like each race is interesting. It's not necessarily just that it's further, just that it's like 100K or just that it's 100 miles. It's also looking into the scenery, the ability to go to certain places. Like this race I'm doing, for example, in June. It's I've actually just had my eye on it for ages because the reviews about the scenery are like really next level. It's actually set in Salzburg. It is set where The Sound of Music was set.
Oh, unreal.
So yeah, yeah, you got that classic scene of The Sound of Music. That's where I'll be running. So it's world class scenery. And so put the distance and the elevation aside, it's just a cool place to be. So I think there is a there is like an endless treadmill of like how far you take it, and I think some ultra runners do have that issue. Um, but I would like to think that once I get to a certain stage, it's like who am I trying to prove anything to? Like I just want to do races I find fun, and that's the kind of aim really, is just to be able to do these races and be fit and healthy and enjoy my time doing it really.
I think if we don't get a reel when you're home with the hills are alive, mate, some that over the top of something, I'm going to be very, very disappointed.
Yeah, well, I've already
Um,
got it. I've got it in the playlist. Yeah.
yeah, good, good, good. I think as well, like that's really interesting. You mentioned about kind of going doing a local 100 or go and do 100 where you know the scenery's amazing, or a 50 or a 50K or whatever. I think by doing what you're doing and kind of climbing the distances and um, doing some bigger races and some smaller races, you kind of earn that ability to just be like, I
Mm.
just want to do this because you know in yourself and in your body, like, I can do this, I am capable of this. And that's quite a powerful thing, I think, isn't it? Like to know that your body will carry you wherever the race is, whatever the race is.
Yeah, you said it better than I could. That's basically what I was trying to say. 100%. I couldn't agree more. The idea that someone can say to me, "I'm doing this event. Do you want to join?" and I don't have to think too hard about it. That's awesome. Um, I think that's really cool. I think to and sometimes I do actually have a story of like I did a race called Val d'Aran a few years ago,
Yeah.
and there was one stage of it I was doing it with a buddy of mine. We were still together at this stage, and there was this huge climb, and it was really like an epic climb. You sort of look back at yourself and you see all these like masochists struggling up the hill, and then you get to the top, and it's the most epic scenery that we've seen like in the race so far, but up there with the most epic scenery we've seen in our lives. And I turned to him and I said, "This is why it's good to be fit. This is why it's amazing to be able to do these things and to have the health and the fitness that we do, because like not many people get to be up here at all. You know, you can't get everywhere on a chopper, you know. If you had the money for it, you know, some places you have to get to by foot, and I think there are some places where you're there and you're sort of like, there's no other way to get here other than like walking or running up here. And that's a cool thing to be able to get to certain places that like a lot of people don't necessarily get to see because unfortunately they don't have the fitness or um, the health to do it, but we do. So it's a privilege, and I have to say I try to be always very grateful. Like during these long races, obviously you can get yourself into like a really negative mindset if you're struggling or having, or it's just always tough. I think like you get a few hours in and that's it. You get into the pain cave and then it's just a grind for the rest of it. If you can't have that sort of positive self-talk, or you can't find the gratitude, within the situation, you can't sort of you can't be grateful for the certain scenario that you're in, then you're not going to enjoy it. And I do think that's really important. Like I'm always trying to tell myself, whatever I'm doing, whatever race I'm approaching, I'm ultimately doing it for fun. I'm not trying to like compete. I'm just doing it because I want to do it. So if I'm not enjoying it, then there really is no point in doing it. It's like one of my favorite ultra runners, Andy Glaze, says, "Smile or you're doing it wrong." I just love that because it's like, if you're not having fun, if you're not enjoying it, then what actually is the point? Like and I try and say this actually quite a lot to people who are doing like marathons or whatever. Some people do marathons because they think they should do marathons because that's what runners do, right? And running is, it's in a growth phase again. Running is becoming more and more popular again, and more people are doing marathons, and it's becoming seemingly easier to achieve something like a marathon. And I see a lot of people ruining their love for something that's really beneficial to them as an individual, running, because they're trying to achieve something they never actually wanted to do in the first place. It's just they felt the pressure of others, making them do it, like a marathon. It's like, you have to enjoy it. If you're not enjoying it, then take a step back and reassess, because you are doing something wrong if you're not enjoying it. And it's crucial that you enjoy the process, because that's kind of all it is. If you're sort of focusing too much on the race or on that like end goal, then you're focusing too much on like a 2 hour or 4 hour race. Whereas you really should be focusing on the hours and hours and hours every week and month and years that you're putting in. Like, because this is a sport where you can genuinely build like a huge engine over years and years. If you don't want to do that, then think about how you're training, think about how you're approaching things, because that matters, I think.
You mentioned engine, mate. I feel like I have to talk to you about Zone 2 training because it has been a big thing on your socials over the recent months, and debates on Zone 2 training and what it is and how to stay there, and can you walk, can you not walk, do you have to go fast, what happens if I drop out of it? Just for people that don't know exactly what Zone 2 training is, give us a bit of a kind of a background, and then how beneficial it's been to you in your journey.
Yeah, so Zone 2 training is definitely like in vogue right now, or at least that phrase, zone 2 training, is something that a lot of people are talking about now. But it's been around for decades. It's not anything new. Elite athletes in both cycling and running have been using it for years and years. And essentially, it's based on the heart rate. So there are sort of commonly known to be 5 training zones that your heart rate sort of sits in. And basically put, the top zones are like your sort of top speeds and the most effort you're putting in, and the lower zones are really easy stuff, right? And the idea essentially is that in order to build what we call aerobic capacity, that is to essentially make your body more economical, make your cardiovascular system more economical, so that you burn the right energy source, then you have to train in those lower zones for the vast majority of your training. And what that will do is it will teach the body to use fat glucose for energy. So that's not, burning more fat It's just using the right energy source rather than using muscles for energy. So what that means in basic terms is that you'll fatigue less quickly, and so you'll be able to function at a certain pace, but use the right energy fuel, so the right energy source, so that you're essentially lasting for longer. So if you think about like if you were to run full pelt up a hill, your legs would just tire out. You know, you have this build up of lactic acid. You'd want to stop immediately, and then after it, you'd be like, "Ah, man, my legs are killing." That's the opposite end of the scale. So that's like the top zones. If you're running really super easy, or let's say if you're walking, you're able to last a lot longer. So you want to teach your body to function in those sort of lower zones and essentially like build out like a really big engine, a really big base. Not only is it really beneficial for your kind of cardiovascular fitness, but it's also going to be just a better way to train in terms of like injury prevention. It's less impactful. Running easy is less impactful on the body, but you're still getting a lot of time on the feet. You're still getting loads of steps in. But it is essential. I think people have maybe been getting a bit annoyed about it online because people hear sort of zone two training and they think, oh, I need to stay in zone two, and no one necessarily knows what it actually means or why they should. But like it is good to encourage that, but I also think what's important to encourage is the fact that you can't just like switch all of your training to easy. You have to actually increase your volume a huge amount as well, because you're like I try and use like the gym as an analogy. Like if you're someone who goes to the gym, you'll know that if you, let's say the bench press, for example, if you're going to go and do a bench press, you're not just going to go in every day and try and do a 1 rep max. That's not going to get you anywhere, right? What you're going to do is you're going to go in there, you're going to do loads of reps at a lower weight, and you build your strength. It's less impactful on your body, and then you'll build that strength, and then occasionally you'll try and do those really heavy reps. So you'll try and do a 1 rep max like every so often. That's exactly the same in running. So you should be only really doing like 20% of your training should fall into the category of like quality workouts. Those quality workouts are, tempo and threshold and hill sprints and anything that's like race specific or building strength, building power. And the other 80% of your volume should be really easy training, which consists of both recovery from some of the more intense workouts, but also just easy training when you're getting time on the feet. And for me, that has absolutely been the game changer in my running performance. For 5 to 6 years, I was just an everyday runner who sort of went out and just probably trained in like zone 3 and zone 4, just kind of trying to go out, go hard. I would slow down throughout my run and just try and get like as fast a 5K as I could every time I went out. And I just don't think I really progressed very far into, I sort of plateaued. But what was most noticeable was that I was just falling into injuries left, right, and center. I had, bad knees. I'd have aches and pains in all sorts of places. I didn't really know why that was happening, and I just thought it was because, as the reputation goes, running is bad for your knees. But that's just really not the case. I was just training completely wrongly. And what I really needed to do is completely slow down the vast majority of my running. And then go hard when I needed to go hard and do race specific stuff and sort of train those fast twitch fibers and train my, heart's ability to stay at that top end and really separate the top energy from the low energy output. And that did wonders for me. It was a long old process. Even as a fairly fit individual, I was still having to break into walks all the time. I was getting frustrated at the process. I wouldn't trust my heart rate monitor. I was going through all the same problems that everyone else went through. But eventually, after months and months of dedication, increasing my volume, spending a lot of time doing it, I was able to finally run a full run in zone 2. And that was, a day I'll never forget, because then I was like, yeah, sweet, I'm making progress. Even in the last 3 or 4 months, I've gone from being off running for the longest period of time because of injury, losing a load of fitness. And from January till now, I've really cut off the best part of about a minute per kilometer, comfortably staying within zone two. Um, and that's someone, that's obviously someone who has been running long distances and everything like that. I was breaking into walks when I first started back in my training. So um, yeah, it's really important, I think. I mean, the classic questions that I always get is how do you calculate your zone two and stuff? It is debated in various different places, like how you can calculate it. The best way to do it is to go to a lab and get it properly done.
Yeah.
I try and just kind of like encourage people to essentially at the end of the day, you can get a ballpark on it. Um, in my opinion, like the Maffetone method of just 180 minus your age will get you to the absolute top end of your zone two. But for me, for example, I'm 29. That means 151 is the top of my zone two. In reality, I want to be a lot lower than that to be training in zone two properly. If I'm rushed for time, then I'm trying to stay within the 140s. But when I'm really deep into my training, I'm doing well with it, then I'm able to actually drop that to within the 130s, which is really still very beneficial. And there's huge benefit also in zone one as well, which doesn't get enough of a look in. So I'm here to make zone one cool again, to be honest. Because I think it's
That's a
this
t-shirt.
huge benefit.
That's a t-shirt.
Yeah. Let's make zone one cool again. But yeah, zone one and two, those lower zones. But the crucial thing is like most people are not being honest with themselves about the effort they're putting in. It requires a lot of patience, but yeah, I really, really hope people are sort of patient with it and can kind of trust the process because it can be an absolute game changer. But 90% of sort of everyday runners I speak to are not doing it really.
It's such a interesting topic to talk about because I think with running a lot of the time there is ego, and ego drives running, and ego drives you know the way running is shared a lot of the time across running social media, whether that be Strava or whatever else you use.
Mm.
A lot of the time that is an ego driven thing, and unfortunately with zone one and zone two, ego and that can't really go together. I don't think they're not really coexisting things.
Yeah, I like to flip it sometimes and like almost prove to people that I can go real slow. Um, because not every run you're doing is going to be like really slow. You can do the slow runs and then maybe once a week go out and absolutely gun it and then prove to them that you can actually go fast. But yeah, no, I fully understand what you're saying. There's a huge part of it is sort of overcoming that ego. I still struggle with it as well. If I've made progress and I'm like, for me personally, I'm sort of at, oh yeah, I've just done a run. I've averaged like 420 per kilometer and I was like comfortable in the 140s. That's incredible. I made loads of progress. And then next week I'm like struggling to stay, under, I'm going to like 510 per kilometer and I'm like, my heart rate's going up and stuff like that. And then I'm like all battling with my ego and I'm like, oh, but last week I was doing so well. That's because I'm too focused on pace. I'm really like, there are too many variables. There's the wind, there's the route, there's the hills, how much alcohol do you have over the weekend? What's your diet looking like? How much sleep did you have? There's all sorts of stuff that is going to like impact your performance. And so really you should just be there in the moment, focusing on how your body feels, how you're operating, because that's all that actually matters. It's like training the heart rate properly. If you're trying to do zone training, you should be really thinking about the zones, not the pace.
We'll finish on this, mate, because I mean I could sit and talk to you for hours, I think, but we'll finish on this. You mentioned at the start of the conversation kind of when you first got into triathlon, doing that event in the inside the indoor half Ironman and looking to a friend of the family and kind of looking at him for a bit of advice maybe. There's people now looking up at you for advice. How does that feel? Is it weird? And as you've seen the growth and more people coming to you, what has that journey been like?
Yeah, man. It is surreal, to be fair. Like, a few years ago, I just started posting about a great interest of mine, with the view to try and help others with it. It's something that really has been a huge part of my life. I think I only started really realizing that running has been such an important anchor for me in the last sort of 5 years, but it really has been. And a lot of people look for things that they can bring sort of value to their own life, and I think being able to post content and try and help others with their running has added like a huge amount to my life. So like for me, it's just I'm really grateful for all the people that show an interest and engage with my stuff, to be fair. And it's got to the point now where sometimes I do bump into individuals in the street, and they'll always say like, I love your stuff or whatever, and it's like really genuine, and it means heaps, and it's very, very humbling that anyone would really genuinely find value in it. And now it's got to the point as well where people, because a lot of my content it's not just necessarily about running. I think running's the great analogy for life. So some of it is like a bit motivational and stuff like that. And I think, the best compliment for me is when someone says, I used to hate running, but I started watching your stuff and you sort of opened the door for me. Like you opened a kind of new perspective where I saw running in a different light, and now I love it. That's a huge compliment. And I think what's just really important to me is that I try and stay grounded in the fact that like I really want to just try and offer value authentically to people. And I try only to, because there's loads of products being like flaunted, and I try only to promote products that I genuinely think are really good. And if a product's shit, I'm not going to promote it. And I think actually behind the scenes, I never really had much respect for content creators, but behind the scenes, it's actually a really difficult balance to strike. You do have opportunities to partner with certain brands and products, and you have to really like battle with these. You have to battle with integrity and these kind of opportunities to do certain things. And I think it's a learning experience for sure. But I think the one thing that I really want to make sure is true throughout is that I'm offering authentic value and helping people find something that has been so helpful to me, because I just think that running has massive value. You just watched the London Marathon last weekend, you see all of this positivity. It's just insane. And I think just more of that is needed, to be honest.